One of the most fascinating breakthroughs in our understanding of the brain is the incredible connection between the brain and the gut. Known as the gut-brain axis, this bidirectional highway has been shown to influence our mood, our cognition, our brain structure, and so much more. To give you just a brief idea of how astounding this idea is, let's start with some basic statistics. Your body contains around 39 trillion cells, of which around 80 billion or so are neurons. But layered on top of, and in some cases inside our bodies, are around 39 trillion bacteria. These bacteria are part of what is called the microbiome, and most of them live in our gut, specifically in the large intestine. Incredibly, we're now learning that the microbiome in the mouth may have a major role to play in brain health outcomes. Research over the last decades also demonstrates that bacteria in the gut can communicate with the brain using the bloodstream, the immune system, and even through a nerve called the vagus nerve. In fact, the makeup of the bacteria in the gut microbiome is now believed to influence the makeup of our brains, and it's been shown to affect such things as the brain's immune system and the leakiness of the blood-brain barrier. Why this is so interesting is that we know that each day we're changing our gut microbiome through the choices we make, particularly through the food we eat. This may in fact represent one of the major ways through which the nutrients we consume are able to affect our brain function. In this episode, we're going to do a deep dive into the new science behind the gut-brain connection and show you how you can harness the latest science to help enhance your brain health. I am Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and this is the Better Brain Blueprint.
Having a healthier brain feels empowering.
Limitless.
Inspiring.
It feels peaceful and it feels hopeful.
It is so essential to your health.
Your brain is your greatest asset.
Improve your brain.
Improve your brain.
Improve your brain.
Improve your life.
Improve your life.
There is no alternative.
Live better longer.
You deserve that.
In this episode, we'll be covering powerful, life-changing information. Remember, if you want full access to the Better Brain Blueprint now and for years to come, you can invest in the entire series, along with the exclusive bonus materials right now for a special price that is only available during this broadcast. Don't wait. Your brain will thank you. Every time you take a bite of food, you're sending data to your gut. This information is interpreted by the trillions of bacteria in your GI tract, where it alters their makeup and influences their function. In addition, our food speaks to our gut cells, as well as to our gut immune cells. All of this transfer of information can impact our brains. In truth, this completely throws off any idea we may have about the brain and the body being separate. Let's explore some specifics of how what happens in our gut is able to affect our brains.
The billions of gut bacteria that live within our intestines are influencing how our brains work right now. They influence our mood. They influence our cognitive functionality today and tomorrow. They play a certainly important role in determining the level of things in the body like inflammation that can be very influential as it relates to our risk for Alzheimer's disease. And even now, the data, the information that's coming to us is expanding at an incredibly rapid rate. We are now seeing incredible information that relates not just to the gut bacteria, but to the bacteria that live within the mouth in terms of how things in the mouth, microbiome related, ultimately influence things like diabetes, blood pressure, both of which have a huge role to play in brain health, and even Alzheimer's risk itself. We're now seeing a direct connection, for example, between a particular species of a bacterium that lives in the mouth called Porphyromonas gingivalis, and how that relates to Alzheimer's risk. So, some might find this threatening that, oh my gosh, my gut bugs and my mouth bugs may be giving me Alzheimer's disease. And that may be true. I think that there's a lot of data to support that. But let's be empowered by this. Let's recognize that now that we understand it, we understand the central role of gut health and mouth health as it relates to preserving brain function. These aren't threatening to us as much as they are tools, powerful tools in the toolbox that allows us to better chart our brain's destiny.
There's absolutely a connection between the gut and the brain. And the well-worn metaphor is that the gut is our second brain because some majority of our serotonin is actually geographically located there. And to me, I'll play along with that party line, but actually I just think it illustrates a myopic obsession with serotonin. And I don't actually think that that's the critical piece that's connecting the mechanism of gut health to brain health. But where we're at right now on a cultural level is that we've begun to appreciate top-down communication from the brain to the gut. We know that if we're chronically stressed or if we're anxious, this might impact our digestive health. Maybe chronic stress is contributing to our IBS. Maybe anxiety is giving us nervous diarrhea. And that's all valid, but it fails to see that this is, of course, a bidirectional reciprocal relationship. And the piece that's more profound and impactful but overlooked is that the state of the gut is directly impacting the state of the brain.
When someone asks me if there's a connection between any part of the body in our bodies, I mean, maybe 30 years ago, I would have had to think about it. But now, even if I'm not aware of a connection, my impulse would be to say, of course there is. That's just the way the body works. It is one of the most complex systems, organic systems, that we know of. And to think that there isn't a connection between the oral microbiome or the mouth and the brain, for example, that would be very, very narrow thinking. Fortunately, we do have studies now that we've been able to quantify the oral microbiome. We discovered it just after the turn of the century, early 2000s. And now we can measure it and we can find where it goes. We have some mechanisms of how it travels throughout the body. And we now understand that there is a oral, gut, and brain axis. It's neuronal, it's through the bloodstream. There are many different types of connections, and that's all we know about at this point. So to think that bugs in the mouth, an infection in the mouth, a cavity, gum disease, because that's how we were speaking before we knew about the oral microbiome, that an infection in the mouth could not affect any other part of the body. And again, that's how our medical system is set up. Dentists and physicians go to different schools and they essentially track along, they're practicing in two different parallel universes. And there's very little connective tissue between those universes because we have a different curriculum. And so it kind of, that alone, and that's been since early 1800s. And because of that, we really have always assumed, whether it's a dentist or a physician or even a patient, even the corporations that make products, that we can just deal what's in the mouth and ignore the rest of the body. And that really has been killing us, literally. Now with the connections between Alzheimer's and oral disease as being one of the big causative agents, I predict, and again, this goes back to this terrible division between medicine and dentistry, I do predict that it will be a combination of neurology and the profession of dentistry that will be a big collaborator in solving and treating Alzheimer's disease. That's how strong that connection is between the mouth and the brain. And of course, there are other connections as well, to the heart, as I mentioned earlier, to the joints. And so this oral systemic connection, when it's fully online and when a physician and a dentist can collaborate together or have some overlap in their academic curriculums, I think all of us will be a lot better off.
Now we have a whole new schema that was not part of my education at all, that really start to talk about the brain as part of a more general system of interrelationship with the body politic of the immune system and the things that were going on all the way down as far regions away as the gut, action at a distance. Because the gut immune system, the so-called mucosal associated lymphoid tissue, would produce messengers that could affect then the liver's Kupffer cells, which are the liver's immune system, which are derived from the same stem cells as were the malt cells in the gut, which then talk to the circulating macrophages, monocytes, eosinophils, and immune cells that are circulating in the blood that then speak to the brain's immune system through the glial interactions. So now we have a whole system of communication in which we start to understand why a person that's gluten sensitive may end up with increased risk to dementia. because now we have this pathway of network interrelationships that when I learned about the brain, I would have never been able to understand.
There are things like psychobiotics that are being discussed, meaning that there are certain microorganisms that can produce neurotransmitters or even certain select metabolites that can benefit the gut and then communicate to the brain. Polyphenols, I was talking about carotenoids before, but polyphenols are actually the largest category of phytochemicals. Polyphenols are essentially, I guess we could start by saying that they're phenolic in structure. So they have a ring structure. So when we have more of those ring structures together, they become a polyphenol. So polyphenols can be things like catechins in tea. It could be like caffeic acid, chlorogenic acid in coffee, just to go back to those particular vehicles of nutrients, phytonutrients. Then we can have bigger, bulkier ones. And those can be things like, we see things like elagitannins from walnuts and pomegranate. Now, those are big and bulky. I kind of think of them as substrate for the microbiome. So when I think of fish in an aquarium and feeding the fish with fish food, to me, the large polyphenols feel like gut food. I'm sprinkling those particular polyphenols to feed my gut microbiome. So these polyphenols are not typically absorbed. I mean, some of the smaller ones might be, but the large ones, the kind of the gut food ones, they go on to be fermented within the colon. So about 90 to 95% of them move their way into the realm of the colon to be worked upon by bacteria. And what we see is that a lot of secondary metabolites form that then can have some kind of systemic effects. So sometimes it's not the precursor mother compound in the food, it's what our gut microbiome does to it. And I think it's really important to mention that because so many people come to me and they say, Deanna, what about lectins and oxalates and goitrogens, these anti-nutrients? And yeah, we need to think about them, but why do we have an issue with those things? Is it because we don't have the gut microbiome to actually break down those substances? Are we not cooking the food properly to reduce those compounds? So there's a dance that happens between the food and our gut. So sometimes, people even think about that with soy, like, oh, well, there's all this talk about soy and I don't like soy. I never got a good result of soy. Well, one of the things we know about soy isoflavones, which by the way are polyphenols, is that their efficacy depends on whether or not we have a certain gut microbiome to convert into things like equal. And equal it gets the baton passed to it, and then now equal can have an effect throughout the body on things like bone and skin. So there is really this gut brain food dance that happens with every meal we take in.
As we look at the panorama of activities of our gut bacteria that relate ultimately to the brain, whether it's maintenance of the gut wall integrity to reduce leaky gut, maintenance of the blood-brain barrier to reduce, let's call it leaky brain, the manufacture of various vitamins that are good for the brain, a reduction of inflammation, production of neurotransmitters. One of the central roles of gut bacteria is to produce, when they are fed appropriately with good levels of fiber, chemicals that are called short-chain fatty acids. And these are chemicals that circulate throughout the body. And while they may serve as fuel for the brain, for example, one of them called butyrate, we also recognize that they are what are called signaling molecules, that they change gene expression, that they modify gene expression as well. And as such, they have an influence on brain functionality by actually changing the expression of genes within the human brain. So what did I just say? I said that our gut bacteria can change the expression of DNA within the human brain. That's when you connect the dots between our dietary fiber, the function of our gut bacteria, their production of these short-chain fatty acids, changing the expression of DNA within the human brain, and how that bodes either well or sets the stage for brain decline is really up to us then as it relates to nurturing our gut bacteria.
It's a funny thing, what happens in our gut really does affect our brain. I don't know if you've ever had that queasy feeling you have to present something at work. And if you're back in the office, that can be an uneasy feeling. And your stomach feels like it's going to turn, or you're feeling nervous about the presentation or whatever it might be. And the interesting thing is a lot of people will be carrying a cup of coffee with them in the morning, right? They'll be carrying a cup of coffee into the meeting. And here's the thing, I like coffee, but it could be the exact wrong substance for you when you're walking into a meeting. That is because of the gut-brain connection.
The gut and the brain are really talking to each other along the vagus nerve constantly. And some 70% of vagal nerve activity is actually afferent, or it's sensory. It's picking up data from the state of affairs in the gut and communicating that back up to the brain. And the way I think about it is that if your gut is well, it's sending a memo back to the brain saying everything is copacetic down here, go have a great day. But if something's off, it's sending a very different memo and saying things are a mess down here, feel unwell. And I think a lot of low-grade chronic gut inflammation and gut issues is creating a lot of low-grade chronic low mood and low-grade anxiety, just as the brain is getting that signal that something is not right in the gut.
Okay, let's do a quick recap because these are some complicated ideas. What we've discussed is the idea that what happens in the gut influences our brains through a number of different pathways. We've also talked about some of the nutrients in our diets that may help pave the way for better brain health by way of the gut-brain connection. Two nutrient groups I want to highlight in particular are polyphenols and fiber. Polyphenols are what give plant foods color, and they concentrate in things like coffee, spices, herbs, colorful fruits, and vegetables. Fiber is found in most minimally processed plant-based foods. We'll come back to both of these in detail in a moment, but for now, let's focus in on a very specific part of the gut-brain connection, and one that's making a lot of waves in recent brain research. It's the link between our oral health and the brain. We used to think that the only major risk from not caring for your mouth was that your teeth would fall out. Research has shown us that not only is oral health incredibly important to overall body health, but it may be absolutely vital to protecting our brain health.
You can get a dysbiosis of the gut microbiome, but in the mouth, it can happen within minutes based on what you eat, what you drink, doing a lot of mouth breathing, doing a lot of speaking, going on a 12-mile jog and ending up breathing through your mouth a lot. So the oral microbiome is a very important, I don't want to call it a passenger. To me, it's a symbiotic relationship that's on board, and I am better for it as a human being in all regards, physically, mentally, by a healthy microbiome, especially the oral microbiome. So if you have bad breath, you should, as a person, realize that something is wrong. And that notion is not, it should not just be based on, oh, I have bad breath. This is a wonderful indicator of A, dysbiosis of the oral microbiome, but B, possible links to even Alzheimer's, cancer, oral cancer, but other cancers throughout the body, pancreatic disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, a disease of the joints, autoimmune diseases. These are all linked to a dysbiosis of the oral microbiome. And one of the great early indicators of that or chronic indicators, is bad breath. So this is the kind of association we need to make. If there is a dysbiosis in your mouth, then you're not well, and you'll never be well unless you address it. And bad breath is a great early indicator of that. The message that dentistry is sending out is that it doesn't matter. I mean, this is very subtle. It's kind of subconscious. You can eat whatever you want as long as you brush and floss, as long as you're using fluoride, as long as you're using all these Band-Aids to fix it. And that's not the message. The message needs to be flipped. And that is that these are metabolic diseases that are occurring in the mouth because of our environment, because of what we're eating. And we have the opportunity to change that and to eat like our ancestors did. So this is the message that needs to be, A, that we can reset the oral microbiome, and if the oral microbiome is dysbiotic, which most of us are exhibiting in this country, on this planet, it's going to lead to chronic diseases throughout the body. Testing the oral microbiome is just a spit of saliva into a tube away, and it's available to anyone, You don't have to go see a physician or even a dentist. This DNA testing is now very prevalent, and it's very exciting to be able to have that information at your fingertips. So there are lots of, we talked about halitosis as an early indicator of disease, gum disease, bleeding gums, just spitting into the sink after you brush your teeth or floss. If you see blood on your floss, if you see a tinge of red saliva in the sink, that is not normal. It's not normal to come out of the shower and be bleeding. I mean, that's the equivalent essentially. And so that is a sign of disease. Now, it's a disease that starts in the mouth, but it could very readily and very quickly develop into disease of the body. So if you're having the beginnings of inflammation in the gums, that would be gingivitis. And then from there, we progress up these different stages of gum disease, type 1, type 2, type 3. That leads to bone loss. It leads to gum recession. It leads to a fibrotic destruction of collagen, which is the essential component that keeps the gums tightly around the teeth. Some of the bugs in the mouth, if they become bullies and if they become very prevalent due to a dysbiosis of the oral microbiome, they start breaking down this connective tissue.
Let's turn now to the links between gut health and two aspects of our brain health: inflammation and mental health. Now, it might seem odd that what happens in our GI tract could have any bearing on what happens in our brains. Yet this is exactly what modern science is telling us. One mechanism that unifies these topics is inflammation. We've long known that the food we eat is one of the biggest drivers of our immune state, including our risk for inflammation. Now we're learning that this pathway may be a reflection of how food impacts the gut, and especially the makeup of the trillions of bacteria living in our gut.
Diet plays a role in brain health because of the newest science of the last few decades of the gut-brain connection. Hippocrates, eons ago, identified this connection, but the research and science had to follow. And that's what's been uncovered in the burgeoning research around the gut microbiome. The fact that the gut and brain are connected helps us understand that food-mood connection.
The other dietary component that I think doesn't make its way to the discussion as it relates to the brain is dietary fiber. Who knew? Now, that dietary fiber doesn't make its way to the brain, but let's be clear, it nurtures the gut bacteria. And our gut bacteria are central as it relates to preserving and enhancing brain function. They're involved in making vitamins that are important for the brain, the very neurotransmitters that are involved in brain function. And indeed, when our gut bacteria have adequate amounts of dietary fiber on board that they need for their health and functionality, they help reduce inflammation as well.
The gut plays this central role in inflammation, in immune dysregulation. I think this is the real plague of modern life, is immune dysregulation. And we at this point have immune systems that are poorly calibrated. They underreact to formidable pathogens, as in the case of chronic Epstein-Barr virus or even long COVID, arguably. We overreact to benign stimuli in the case of seasonal allergies, and we attack our own self-tissue in the case of autoimmune disease. I think a lot of this has to do with what's going wrong in the gut in modern life.
There are studies now coming out, and these are very recent studies within the last year, that are indicating that there is a connection between mood disorders, any kind of, even a form of psychosis, bipolar conditions, and what's going on in your mouth. And so dentists have maybe had this association for a long time. We're now seeing signs that the bacteria in the mouth, actually via different pathways, it can be through inflammation, infection, injury, it can be the byproducts of those bacteria, toxins that get into the blood, literally can get into the brain. They can pass the blood-brain barrier, and that barrier changes over time. As you get older, it's more, it allows other things to get through more readily. It can be affected by even hydration, but also taking medications and stress. But once these substances from the mouth get into the brain, then you have neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation is one of the causes for kind of the psychiatric aspect or the mood of your patient. It can affect you among many other things. But a bug in the mouth can, as we've seen now in studies, can have an effect on psychiatric disorders?
Our gut health is intricately related to our mental health, and here's how. The gut and brain are connected, and when we eat certain foods that may not be the healthiest for us, the breakdown products of those foods are damaging to the gut. As they damage the gut, they set up for inflammation or dysbiosis, and as you develop dysbiosis, this feeds back in a loop to the brain. So gut inflammation becomes ultimately brain inflammation. You also develop conditions along the way like leaky gut. Now, how do we think about reversing this or rethinking what we're doing? Simply by eating healthier.
I think there's several big triggers for inflammation in the gut. Of course, food. Now, I don't like to demonize food at all, as long as it's a whole food source. There are absolutely people who might have sensitivities to certain foods or allergies. So, example, if they have allergy to peanut, sensitivity to gluten, that can be a problem, right? But there are other things, that we ingest that are not food, right? They're chemicals. They are, things that the body doesn't recognize as being nutritive, and in fact could be harmful. Recently there was a lot of information about food coloring and children. And I think the state of California was getting rid of a bunch of them because they're always ahead of the curve in terms of removing sort of toxins from food. But they found that children were having adverse, reactions to certain food colorings. And I think, there's things like other processed fats that can be problematic too. Of course, then there's things like heavy metals and contaminants, toxicants that end up in food. So all of those have to be, they are absorbed, and the immune system has to decide what to do with it. So really on a cellular level, there is this sort of decision-making process that occurs. Once we absorb these things into our bloodstream, there are certain, we call them antigen presenting cells. They sort of grab onto, the substance, and they're going to present it to a T cell, which is a lymphocyte, a white blood cell. That T cell will then say, hey, this is bad. We're going to have to, proliferate. We're going to make some killer T cells, or we're going to tell some other B cells to make antibodies. And so then we'll get antibodies against that substance. And those cells don't just stay there. They actually move out, right? They move out and then go on and do their job. And so, inflammation can start in the gut, but then travel to other parts of the human body. So I guess that's one of the reasons why we tend to get a lot of problems with the brain, is because we have this direct sort of communication to our brain from the gut.
I've definitely had patients who have gut health issues, and it's tough for them, or even the clinician, to establish, did the gut issue happen first or the mental health condition happen first. For example, there's a very high correlation with things like irritable bowel syndrome, and these become really important for us to understand as clinicians, because people who have upset in their gut, whether it's inflammation, whether it's underlying condition, irritation, can actually also have a disruption in how they're feeling emotionally in terms of conditions like anxiety and depression. Now, remembering that 90 to 95% of the serotonin receptors and serotonin production happens in the gut, you start to realize that there's a connection there.
Leaky gut can create states of chronic systemic inflammation, which directly impact the brain. In fact, the amygdala is so central to anxiety. It's sort of our fear center in our brain. When the body is inflamed, it sends information to the amygdala that's basically saying the body's under attack. And then the amygdala amps up the feeling of, okay, everything is potentially a threat.
The Better Brain Blueprint is all about empowering you to lead a longer, better, happier, and healthier life. No matter your health history, you have the ability to improve your brain function right now by incorporating the information from this series into your daily life. This cutting-edge information just isn't available anywhere else. And that's why owning all of the expert interviews, the transcripts, and the supporting materials is so incredibly valuable. I highly recommend making the Better Brain Blueprint, along with the bonus materials, part of your family library. By making some simple lifestyle changes, you can create lasting improvements in your health and in your life. These changes may not only lower your risk for conditions like Alzheimer's and mood disorders, they will almost certainly improve your brain function right now. You might notice that you start thinking more clearly, forgetting less, and generally feeling better throughout the day. Sometimes the hardest part in taking action and making these lifestyle changes is figuring out where to start. If you're ready to start right now, the bonus materials include resources that will help you apply this knowledge to your life, one step at a time. We interviewed the world's leaders in general brain health, mood disorders, Alzheimer's disease, and more. And we received some fantastic, actionable information from each of our experts. Unfortunately, we didn't have room to include it all in this series, but we know it's critical, life-changing information that has the power to transform your health. That's why the bonus materials also include the full-length interviews from all of the experts you've seen throughout this series. The great thing about owning this series is that you can easily share it with friends and family and watch their lives change too. In fact, if you found this series helpful, I invite you to share this broadcast event with a friend or with your loved ones. You just might change their lives and their destiny. The most important investment in your life is an investment in your health. Click the button on this page to invest in your Better Brain Blueprint today. We've learned a lot over the course of this episode about how our gut influences our brains. And as always, I want to make sure you're taking away practical, actionable information from these episodes. So let's spend a moment to cover the specifics of what science tells us is most important for our gut and for our gut-brain connection. First off, what should you do for a healthier gut microbiome? It's important to keep in mind that the research is still early on as it relates to exactly what a healthy microbiome is supposed to look like. But by and large, it seems like a microbiome with more diversity is key. One great way to foster a diverse microbiome is to eat diverse foods, especially plant-based foods, and to eat less highly processed foods that contain added sugar and additives. Choosing to load up on colorful, non-starchy vegetables and fruits, including leafy greens, nuts, berries, seeds, and other plants, is a good way to do this. In addition to eating diverse and colorful plant foods, which are already rich in polyphenols, you might benefit from including more spices and herbs, coffee and tea in your diet, as these are especially concentrated sources of polyphenols. Polyphenols are now regarded as a type of prebiotic, which means that they can stimulate healthy microbes and may even suppress unhealthy ones. They may also benefit the brain. Next up, let's talk about fiber. Fiber is found in all manner of plant-based foods, but it's lost when food is processed. So eating whole plant-based foods is great for fiber, but a piece of white bread, not so much. Fiber acts as food for your gut microbiome, which then allows your gut microbes to create molecules like short-chain fatty acids, which may benefit the brain and even the blood-brain barrier. Some great sources of dietary fiber include nuts, seeds, berries, avocado, beans, oats, and apples. But again, you can find fiber in most unprocessed plant foods. Then there are probiotics, which are defined as microbes that benefit us. Probiotics can be consumed in the form of fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, and tempeh, or they can come in the form of supplements. Personally, I try to eat at least one fermented food each day, in part because of the gut-brain connection. When it comes to supplements, there's still some debate over which ones are best. Generally speaking, if you're looking for a probiotic, try to find one that contains strains of bacteria that have been studied in human clinical research. Lastly, what else can you do to protect your gut-brain connection? Getting good sleep, minimizing chronic stress, and avoiding unnecessary antibiotics are all good steps to preserve the wellness of your gut-brain link.
The whole aspect of dietary diversity, I think, is now being better acknowledged. So just to speak to the science first, and then I'll speak to some practical ways to start to get a more diverse diet. If we look at the literature, what we see is that there are associations between dietary diversity and helping with things like the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome wants to be diverse, right? We need all of those many different players in the gut in order to produce healthy amounts of metabolites, these secondary metabolites. So with a more diverse diet, we get a more diverse gut microbiome. In the literature, that translates into less allergy, less risk for things that would be more immune in nature. We also see a translation into things like mood states. So less things like depression, anxiety can even be connected to dietary diversity. We also see that when people have more diverse diets, they tend to be more nutritionally replete, meaning that they're hitting on many cylinders of getting their vitamins, their minerals. They're not overdoing one particular category.
As a nutritional psychiatrist, one of the things I care deeply about is how people are eating to improve not only their gut health and therefore their brain health. Because if we understand that the gut and brain are uniquely connected, and the gut and brain originate from the exact same cells in the human embryo, then divide apart to form two separate organs, but remain connected physiologically and biochemically and anatomically by the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, we begin to fill in this picture that our gut health is related closely to our brain health. So as a psychiatrist and a nutritional psychiatrist, I care deeply about how people are eating for their better brain health.
When it comes to promoting health in the mouth, we really should start from the preventative side of things. And, and obviously this is from day one, from being an infant. Obviously that's not always possible. And when you grow up to be an adult, you may already have had some cavities. You may have had a bout of gum disease. There's always the opportunity to be able to reset the oral microbiome. So the basis for that, one of the fundamentals of that is your saliva. So there are things in saliva, proteins and immunoglobulins and factors and digestive enzymes. So it's digesting food. It's helping keep in solution minerals so that your teeth are able to remineralize at the right time. That's a pretty tricky thing to do, to keep a certain amount of concentration of minerals dissolved and ready to be absorbed by a demineralized tooth. It's also fighting off infections. It's sampling the outside environment and giving information to the immune system. It's also digesting foods. But one of the crucial aspects of saliva is that it buffers and maintains the pH of the mouth. And optimally, the pH is 6.9 to 7.2. I would say over 7.0 would be best. When you're at the dentist and we tell you, or the hygienist tells you, oh, you've got a few cavities, and you're kind of, oh no, not again. And it's like, what did I do wrong? What's the solution here? And our fallback is, shame on you. You didn't brush and floss enough. And so this really should be on the bottom of the list. Above that should be diet. Diet is huge. Diet has changed. The irony of discussing diet when it comes to oral microbiome is that it's the oral microbiome research, and I'm referring to one study out of Italy, again, less than a year old, where they took DNA from tartar, from calculus, from people from the Neolithic era, and even before that and after that. And we were able to see, based on the oral microbiome changes in reaction to dietary changes, when the change occurred between becoming hunter-gatherers to that agricultural, we sat in one valley and kind of hung out and grew stuff, and we lived and died by that. So it's the oral microbiome that has had to change due to diet. Diet is huge. And now it's gotten even worse, right? We're even eating more processed foods that have a different DNA, that have been modified. And they're even more broken down and processed. Ultra processed is now a term. We've got processed food. Now we have ultra processed food. And the bacteria in the oral microbiome, it's a mismatch disease. They go to town, and metabolically, they produce their byproduct of metabolizing these broken down, refined, fiberless foods. And that's what causes the oral microbiome to become very dysbiotic.
There are so many things to avoid as we think about our gut and our gut microbiome. I think it's really important to kind of think of like a scale, like what to avoid, what to include. And for many people, they like to focus on what to include, because then this concept of crowding out the bad to have the good. But let's talk about some of the top offenders. First of all, there's a personalized aspect to this, because one person's offenders might not be what someone else's gut offenders would be. Like some people can take on certain amounts of dairy, whether goat milk, cow's milk. So, there's just that to start with, just by way of thinking about like personalized responses. Now, there are some things that's just clear across the board, apply to everybody. Sugar is a big one. refined sugars in all their many names and formats would be, first and foremost, I would see as inflammatory. It would not be gut microbiome health promoting. And along those lines, I'm just going to toss into the mix artificial sweeteners. Because people say, oh, Deanna, you just said no sugar, so what am I supposed to do? So then people pivot over to things that are artificial or synthetic in their sweetness. So those are also disruptive to the gut microbiome. They can change pH. They can change just translocation of the gut, things that get into the through that gut barrier a bit more. So I think about that, sugar first and foremost. Now, the second thing I'm going to say might be a little controversial because I know that, so many people are on the bandwagon of, we need to eat fat, more fat. Sure. My PhD dissertation was on essential fatty acid absorption and metabolism. For 4 years, I dove into all things fatty acids. There's a lot of nuance to fat. Not all fatty acids are created equal, and they have different responses. So what the scientific literature would say is that when we have a meal that is high, disproportionately high in long-chain saturated fat, we can perturb the gut microbiome. We can cause gut inflammation. Well, how does that happen? That can happen by changing the gut microbiome and then eventually increasing the production of things like lipopolysaccharide, so certain endotoxins. So this is called metabolic endotoxemia. It's where we actually cause toxicity in the gut based on the things that we're eating. And oftentimes we wonder, well, why do I feel sick after eating? Shouldn't I feel energized? But many times people feel sick. They feel flu-like. And I would chalk that up to the postprandial inflammatory response that can occur with a lot of these very high saturated fat meals. And I'm talking like, let me just give an example, like a fast food kind of breakfast. I'm talking of, some kind of milkshake with some kind of refined carbohydrates with a lot of, saturated fat. So we're talking things like bacon or processed meats, but it can also include dairy. And I'm not against those foods, but those foods in isolation without the counterpart of things like plants can actually do our gut damage.
The science of how to protect and improve your gut health as a pathway to better brain health is just exploding. And we're still at the very start of what promises to be an unbelievable journey of discovery and application. Every time you take a bite of food, you're programming your gut microbiome. And with each passing moment, your gut microbiome is influencing your brain. In a very real way, we harbor a universe within us that's impacting how we think, act, and feel each day. In the years to come, research will continue to teach us the specifics of what gut microbes are best for our brain and what we need to do to increase or decrease different populations of gut bacteria. But for today, realize that you have the power to make significant changes to your gut bacteria, your gut immune system, and gut cells, and in doing so, translate healthy data from your gut to your brain.
The profession of dentistry is undergoing a lot of change, and these changes are all based on new information. It's all about the oral microbiome. Knowing that knowledge of the oral microbiome, making sure that your practitioner knows about it, is a game changer when it comes to oral health, not just oral health, but optimal systemic health as well.
To achieve a better brain blueprint, one of the things that you can very easily do is think more deeply about how you're eating. It's one of the factors, one of many factors in a holistic and integrated approach to achieving optimal brain health. And just simply thinking about one habit that you maybe have picked up that you don't like and starting there to maybe evolve and change it can be a very powerful tool to helping you feel better.
Brain health matters because good mental health is simply a reflection of healthy brain function.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Better Brain Blueprint. I'm Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the next episode.